The young pianist had always carried her music like a secret treasure. Every morning, she would wake up before dawn, careful not to wake her family, and sit by the small upright piano in the corner of her tiny living room. Her fingers moved delicately over the keys, finding melodies that seemed to float from somewhere deep inside her. She had spent years perfecting her technique, learning every note with care, yet she never thought she was ready to show her talent to anyone outside of her quiet home. That day was different. A notice had been posted in her town about a special event. A famous pianist, admired worldwide, would be visiting to see local talent. The young pianist had read the announcement over and over, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. People in town whispered about the pianist's brilliance and strictness, about how he rarely acknowledged anyone he considered unworthy. The young pianist had always dreamed of playing for someone like him, but the idea of rejection made her stomach twist. Still, the hope that maybe, just maybe, her music could be heard, pushed her forward. She arrived at the hall early, clutching her sheet music to her chest. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter as families and music enthusiasts gathered. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and a polished grand piano stood under the soft glow of the chandelier. The air smelled faintly of waxed wood and flowers placed on the piano, as though the space had been carefully prepared for something extraordinary. When the famous pianist finally entered, the room fell into a hush. He moved with a quiet confidence, dressed sharply, his eyes scanning the room with a discerning gaze. He greeted a few people briefly but mostly remained silent, his expression unreadable. The young pianist's heart pounded as she watched him. He looked imposing, as if no one could ever impress him. She felt a sudden wave of doubt. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe she didn't belong here. She glanced down at her music and whispered to herself that she had to try anyway. A few participants had already played when it was her turn. She walked to the piano, her steps careful and deliberate. The pianist watched her but didn't move or react in any way. She felt the weight of his gaze, cold and unyielding, and a knot tightened in her chest. For a moment, she considered stepping back, retreating into the comfort of her home where no one could judge her. But then she thought about the countless hours she had spent practicing, the nights she had stayed up past midnight perfecting a single passage, the sacrifices she had made. She could not turn away now. Taking a deep breath, she opened her music and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes filled the room softly, almost timidly, like a whisper seeking attention. The pianist's eyes remained steady on her, showing nothing. She continued, pouring her feelings into each chord, letting her emotions guide her fingers. The music grew richer, more confident, yet still gentle and expressive. She forgot everything else. The audience, the hall, even the famous pianist's watchful eyes. All that mattered was the music. Some in the audience shifted in their seats, leaning in, drawn by the purity and intensity of her playing. Others smiled, nodding along, sensing the sincerity behind every note. She played with all the passion she had kept hidden for so long, letting the story of her heart unfold through the piano. Each rise and fall of the melody reflected her struggles, her dreams, her fears, and her hope. The pianist finally moved slightly, as if acknowledging her presence, though his expression remained calm and unreadable. She did not notice. She was lost in her music. When she reached the final notes, she lingered on them, allowing the last sound to hang in the air before gently letting go. Silence followed for a few seconds, a quiet stillness that made her stomach tighten with fear and anticipation. Had she done enough? Would anyone see what she had given? Then, slowly, the audience began to clap. At first, it was soft, almost hesitant, but soon the applause grew louder, filling the hall with warmth and appreciation. The young pianist's eyes welled up, a mix of relief and joy washing over her. She had shared her music and people had felt it. Her hands trembled as she rose from the piano, bowing slightly. The famous pianist remained seated, his gaze steady. Yet there was something in his eyes that she could not quite read. An unspoken attention, a quiet curiosity that had not been there before. After the performance, she stepped away from the piano, her heart still racing. People came up to her, offering kind words and encouragement. She smiled politely, thanking them, but her eyes kept returning to the famous pianist. He spoke to a few participants briefly, offering critiques or compliments, but when she approached to greet him, he barely acknowledged her. His words were polite but distant. She felt the familiar sting of dismissal, yet she also felt something else. A spark, a hint that her music had reached him, even if he did not show it. Walking out of the hall later, the young pianist felt a mixture of emotions. The coldness of the famous pianist had stung, but the warmth from the audience and the thrill of sharing her music outweighed it. She knew she had more to learn, more to practice, and more to share. Her journey had just begun, and the encounter, though intimidating, had given her a glimpse of what was possible. That night, she sat by her piano again, replaying the experience in her mind. She remembered the way the notes had felt under her fingers, the way the music had flowed, and the moments when she had felt completely alive. She thought about the famous pianist, about the challenge she had faced, and about the determination it had taken to play despite fear. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet promise to herself. One day, she would play again, and when she did, no one would be able to ignore her music. As she played late into the night, each note carried more confidence, more courage, and more hope. The shadows of doubt began to fade, replaced by a belief that talent, passion, and persistence could make even the most distant hearts notice. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that the world might just listen to her someday. And in that moment, with the soft glow of the lamp casting light on the keys, she played not for recognition, not for praise, but for the music itself, the part of her that no one could dismiss or ignore. The young pianist woke up the next morning with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The memory of the previous day's performance lingered in her mind. Even though the famous pianist had not shown any visible reaction, she could not shake off the feeling that he had noticed something special in her playing. She had poured her heart into each note, and somewhere deep down, she believed that her music had reached him. A few days later, news spread through the town that the famous pianist would host a private session to select a few promising talents for a special performance at a renowned music festival. The young pianist's heart leapt at the opportunity. This was more than just another audience. This was a chance to prove herself to someone who seemed impossible to impress. She spent the morning gathering her sheet music, practicing her scales, and reviewing the pieces she had prepared. Each note felt heavier than the last because she knew this could be the moment that changed everything. When she arrived at the grand hall, she noticed the same polished piano from before, gleaming under the soft light. The atmosphere was charged with tension as other participants nervously tuned their instruments or whispered words of encouragement to each other. The famous pianist entered, his presence commanding silence. He moved through the room with measured steps, examining the musicians with a critical eye. His expression was as unreadable as ever, and the young pianist felt a familiar wave of doubt. Could she really impress him? Could her music reach someone so discerning? Despite her fears, she reminded herself of the countless hours of practice she had endured. She remembered the nights she had spent perfecting difficult pieces, the sacrifices she had made, and the unwavering love she had for music. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, and her heart swelled with determination. She would not let fear hold her back. She had prepared, and now it was her moment. One by one, participants played their pieces. Some were technically perfect but lacked emotion. Others played with flair but faltered under pressure. The young pianist watched closely, observing both the famous pianist and the other musicians. She noticed the slightest flicker of disapproval or nod of interest in his eyes, realizing that his attention was earned, not given. This knowledge fueled her desire to make every note count. Finally, it was her turn. She walked towards the piano, her sheet music held tightly against her chest. The room seemed to shrink around her, every eye turning towards her, and the famous pianist's gaze focused intently. For a moment, doubt crept in, threatening to freeze her in place. But she took a deep breath and reminded herself that music was her voice, her way of speaking when words were not enough. She had a story to tell, and she would not let fear silence it. As her fingers touched the keys, the first notes filled the hall. This time, she played with more confidence than before. She allowed the music to carry her emotions, weaving a story of struggle, hope, and determination. The melody rose and fell, each passage carefully shaped to convey the depth of her feelings. She felt a connection with the piano, as if it were an extension of her own being. The notes flowed naturally, and for a moment, the world outside the music faded away. The audience watched in quiet awe, drawn in by the sincerity of her performance. Even the famous pianist leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing in concentration. He had seen many musicians, but there was something different about her playing. It was not just skill. It was passion, authenticity, and courage. She played as if the piano were speaking for her, revealing her innermost thoughts and emotions without hesitation. Halfway through her piece, the young pianist felt a surge of energy. Her confidence grew with every note, and she began to experiment subtly with tempo and dynamics, giving the music a unique voice. She was no longer trying to impress anyone. She was expressing herself fully. The hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of her performance, and the audience leaned in, captivated by the music's intensity and beauty. Even the famous pianist's expression softened slightly, a hint of appreciation flickering in his eyes. As she approached the final notes, she slowed her pace, letting each chord resonate fully. She allowed the music to linger in the air, creating a moment of quiet anticipation. When the last note faded, the silence was immediate and profound. For a few seconds, no one moved, as if everyone was suspended in the magic she had created. Then, applause erupted, louder and more enthusiastic than anything she had heard before. The young pianist felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and validation. The famous pianist remained seated for a moment longer, watching her carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying weight. He offered a few words of critique, precise and insightful, but there was also a hint of admiration. He acknowledged her skill and the emotional depth of her playing, something rare and remarkable. The young pianist listened intently, grateful for his words, yet also aware that her journey was just beginning. There was still so much to learn, so much to explore. After the session, she stepped outside into the cool evening air, her heart still racing. She walked slowly, reflecting on what had just happened. The experience had been both challenging and exhilarating. She had faced someone who seemed impossible to impress, and through her music, she had communicated something genuine and powerful. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to her. That night, she returned home and sat at her piano once more. She played not to prepare for the next event or to earn praise, but simply to immerse herself in the music she loved. Each note was a reminder of her passion and perseverance. She remembered the famous pianist's words, the moments when he had watched her closely, and the subtle recognition in his gaze. She knew she had made an impression, even if it was quiet and understated. As the hours passed, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that talent alone was not enough. It was the courage to continue, to face challenges, and to express herself fully that truly mattered. The young pianist knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more skeptics and dismissals, but she also knew that her music was her strength and her voice. No matter what happened, she would continue to play, to share her story through the piano, and to pursue the dreams she had carried for so long. In the days that followed, she practiced diligently, refining her pieces and exploring new melodies. She thought about the upcoming festival and the chance to perform in front of an even larger audience. The memory of the famous pianist's watchful eyes remained in her mind, not as a source of fear, but as motivation. She wanted to play with the same sincerity and emotion, knowing that her music could reach people in ways words could not. Through this experience, the young pianist grew not only as a musician but also as a person. She learned that true artistry required more than technical skill. It demanded courage, authenticity, and the willingness to face doubt and criticism. She embraced each challenge, each note, and each performance as an opportunity to grow, to connect, and to share her passion with the world. And though the famous pianist had once ignored her, she now knew that with determination and heart, she could leave an impression that no one could overlook. The young pianist woke early that morning, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and nervousness. She had been invited to a special rehearsal session with other selected musicians for the festival. While she was thrilled at the opportunity, a quiet anxiety tugged at her heart. She knew that performing in front of the famous pianist again would be more challenging than anything she had faced before. She felt both eager to show her growth and apprehensive about whether she could meet his expectations. The practice room was spacious, with large windows letting in the soft morning light. A grand piano stood in the center, polished to a shine, its keys waiting for someone to unlock their sound. Other musicians were already there, warming up with scales and short exercises. The young pianist watched them for a moment, noticing their nervous energy and quiet determination. She felt a kinship with them, but also a twinge of pressure. Each person there had been chosen because of their talent, yet only a few would stand out. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was ready to give her best. As she sat at the piano, she could feel the tension in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, a mixture of nerves and excitement. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, remembering the long hours of practice, the sacrifices she had made, and the love she held for music. It was this passion, this connection to the piano, that had carried her this far. No matter the outcome, she knew she had something unique to offer. The famous pianist entered the room quietly, observing without immediate comment. His presence commanded attention, and the room fell silent. He moved slowly, watching each musician with a critical eye. The young pianist felt the familiar pressure, but she did not allow it to overwhelm her. Instead, she focused on her breathing, letting it calm her nerves. She thought about the melody she had prepared, visualizing each note and how she would express it. She was ready. The session began with each musician performing a short piece. Some were technically impressive yet lacked emotion. Others played with flair but faltered under the scrutiny of the famous pianist's gaze. The young pianist noticed the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight tilt of his head, the faint raising of an eyebrow. It became clear that his attention was not easily won. It had to be earned through sincerity and mastery. She felt both intimidated and inspired by the challenge. When it was her turn, she approached the piano with steady steps, holding her sheet music close. The famous pianist's eyes followed her every move, unyielding yet observant. She took a deep breath and seated herself, her fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, time seemed to slow, and the room became a quiet space for music alone. She began to play, her hands moving gracefully over the keys, each note deliberate and full of emotion. The young pianist allowed herself to be carried by the music, letting her feelings guide the rhythm and flow. She played with a mixture of strength and delicacy, expressing her journey through each phrase. Her fingers moved confidently, yet there was vulnerability in the sound, a raw honesty that made the music resonate. She was no longer playing to impress. She was playing to communicate, to share the story that lived within her. The audience in the room, though smaller than a concert hall, felt the power of her performance. The other musicians paused to listen, captivated by the depth and sincerity of her playing. The famous pianist leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing in concentration. He had seen many talented performers, but the young pianist's expression of emotion through technique was rare. Her music told a story that words could not convey, and for the first time he seemed genuinely interested. As the piece progressed, she added subtle nuances, slight changes in tempo and dynamics that reflected her own interpretation. Each note carried intention, each chord spoke with purpose. She felt a sense of freedom and confidence, knowing that her music was alive, evolving with her emotions. The room seemed to breathe with her, the sound of the piano filling every corner with warmth and resonance. Reaching the final section, the young pianist slowed her pace, allowing each note to linger. The music held the room in suspended anticipation, a quiet moment before the conclusion. She pressed the final keys softly, letting the sound fade naturally into silence. The stillness that followed was profound, a shared breath between the pianist, the audience, and herself. Then, slowly, applause began, growing in intensity as the room acknowledged the beauty and honesty of her performance. The famous pianist remained seated, his expression calm but thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and precise, highlighting both her strengths and areas to refine. Yet beneath his critique, there was unmistakable respect. He recognized her dedication, her emotional depth, and her ability to connect with the music in a way few could. The young pianist listened intently, absorbing his guidance while also feeling the quiet validation of her talent. After the session, she stepped outside into the fresh air, her heart still beating rapidly. She walked slowly, reflecting on the experience. The pressure she had felt before playing was now replaced with a sense of accomplishment. She had faced someone critical, someone impossible to impress, and she had performed with authenticity and courage. The applause, the feedback, and the fleeting acknowledgement from the famous pianist were all reminders that her hard work was paying off. That evening, she returned to her home and sat at her piano once more. She played for herself, exploring new melodies and experimenting with different expressions. The joy of music, unbound by expectation, filled her. She thought about the upcoming festival and the chance to perform on a larger stage. The young pianist felt a renewed determination, understanding that each performance was not just about recognition, but about growth, exploration, and the joy of sharing her music. Over the next few days, she practiced with greater focus, honing her technique while keeping her emotional connection strong. She experimented with different interpretations, striving to bring new life to familiar pieces. Each practice session strengthened not only her skill but her confidence, reinforcing the belief that her music was meaningful and powerful. Through this journey, she learned that true artistry was a blend of talent, courage, and perseverance. She faced challenges and doubts, yet each obstacle became an opportunity to grow. The famous pianist's presence, once intimidating, now served as motivation, a reminder that excellence required both dedication and heart. The young pianist understood that her journey was far from over, but she embraced the path ahead, ready to meet every challenge with determination and grace. In quiet moments, she reflected on her progress and the experiences that had shaped her. She remembered the initial dismissal, the long hours of practice, and the small victories along the way. Each note she played carried not only skill but the story of her journey, the struggles, the dreams, and the unwavering love for music. She realized that her music was a voice that could reach beyond words, touching hearts and inspiring others. With each passing day, her confidence grew, and her music became richer, more expressive, and more personal. She knew that the festival was just another step, another chance to share her gift. The young pianist understood that true success was not measured by immediate recognition, but by the courage to keep playing, to keep expressing herself, and to keep connecting with the world through her art. She embraced this truth, ready to face the future with resilience, passion, and an unwavering dedication to her music. The day of the festival arrived, and the young pianist could feel the energy in the air. She stood outside the grand hall, her hands gripping her sheet music tightly. The building loomed large, filled with light and sound, and the buzz of the audience reached her even before she stepped inside. She had never played on such a stage with so many people watching, but she reminded herself of everything she had worked for. She had prepared, practiced, and persevered, and now it was time to let the music speak. As she walked through the hall, the grand piano stood at the center of the stage, its polished surface reflecting the lights above. Musicians and performers moved about, checking instruments and tuning. The audience filled the seats, creating a sea of anticipation. The young pianist felt a moment of nervousness, her stomach twisting with both excitement and fear. But she closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing alone, letting the music flow from her heart. That was where her strength came from, and she held onto it tightly. Backstage, other performers prepared in silence, some pacing, some adjusting their instruments, others quietly playing scales to warm up. She noticed the tension in the air, but she did not allow it to distract her. Instead, she focused on her music, imagining every note, every chord, and every emotion she wanted to convey. She knew this performance would be different. It was not just about playing the right notes, but about connecting with the audience and the music itself. Finally, her turn came. The announcer called her name, and she walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. The lights shone down, and the audience quieted, all eyes fixed on her. At the side of the stage, she spotted the famous pianist, seated quietly, his expression calm and observing. His presence sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine, but she reminded herself that she was not playing to impress him alone. She was playing to express herself, to share her story through the piano. She sat at the piano and positioned her hands on the keys. The first notes filled the hall gently, capturing the attention of everyone present. She allowed the music to unfold naturally, each phrase carefully shaped to carry her emotions. Her fingers danced across the keys, precise yet expressive, balancing technical skill with heartfelt emotion. She felt the connection to the piano deep within her, and it became a bridge between her inner world and the audience. The music flowed, and the young pianist became fully absorbed in her performance. She allowed herself to experiment with tempo, dynamics, and expression, letting the melody rise and fall with her emotions. Every chord she played carried a part of her journey, her struggles, and her dreams. The audience responded, leaning in, captivated by the authenticity and intensity of her music. The famous pianist remained still, his eyes fixed on her, but there was a subtle change in his gaze, a spark of attention and curiosity that had not been there before. As she reached the middle of her piece, she felt a surge of confidence. The notes came more easily, her fingers moving with grace and certainty. She could feel the audience reacting, but she did not let their presence distract her. Instead, she embraced it, using their energy to fuel her playing. The music seemed to expand, filling every corner of the hall, enveloping everyone in its warmth and depth. The young pianist approached the climax of her performance with a mix of precision and emotion. She played each chord deliberately, letting the tension and release guide the audience through her story. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of expressing herself fully. She could sense the famous pianist leaning slightly forward, his eyes focused, and she felt a quiet determination to make every note meaningful. As she concluded, she held the final chord, letting it resonate fully. The silence that followed was almost tangible, a shared moment of stillness and reflection. Then, gradually, the audience erupted into applause, their clapping echoing through the hall. The young pianist felt tears prick her eyes as she rose from the piano, bowing deeply. The applause continued, growing louder, a testament to the power of her music and the emotions she had conveyed. The famous pianist stood, his expression thoughtful, and approached her as the audience continued to cheer. He spoke quietly, offering words of praise that were both precise and heartfelt. He acknowledged her skill, her emotional depth, and her ability to communicate through the piano in a way that few musicians could. The young pianist listened, absorbing every word, feeling a mix of pride, relief, and humility. She realized that her music had reached him, finally bridging the gap that had once seemed insurmountable. After the performance, she stepped off the stage, her heart still racing from the experience. Friends and fellow musicians approached her, congratulating her on a performance that had left everyone in awe. She smiled, thanking them, but her thoughts kept returning to the piano and the emotions she had shared. She knew that this was a milestone, not the end of her journey. There was still much to learn, much to explore, and much to express. That night, she returned home and sat at her piano once more. She played softly, reflecting on the day, on the moments when her music had touched the hearts of those listening, and on the recognition she had finally received from the famous pianist. The experience had been both humbling and inspiring, reinforcing her love for music and her commitment to her craft. Each note she played was a reminder of her journey, the struggles, the perseverance, and the joy of sharing her gift with the world. Over the following days, she continued to practice, exploring new melodies and refining her technique. She experimented with different interpretations, seeking to deepen her understanding of the music and herself. Each session strengthened not only her skills but also her confidence, teaching her that true artistry was a blend of talent, dedication, and emotional honesty. Through this performance, the young pianist learned an important lesson. Recognition was not the only measure of success. What mattered most was the courage to share her music, the willingness to face challenges, and the ability to connect with others through her art. She embraced this truth, understanding that each performance was an opportunity to grow, to inspire, and to express the story within her. With every practice session and performance, her confidence grew. She knew that the path ahead would have challenges and setbacks, but she also knew that her music was her voice, her strength, and her joy. The young pianist felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue her journey, to explore new musical landscapes, and to share her passion with the world. She understood that the journey of a musician was not just about playing notes but about touching hearts, inspiring others, and staying true to the music within. After the festival, the young pianist returned home, her heart still filled with excitement and a quiet pride. The applause, the recognition, and the words of praise from the famous pianist played over in her mind like a gentle melody. She had faced challenges, doubts, and fears, and through it all, her music had spoken louder than any words could. For the first time, she truly felt that her talent was not just recognized but appreciated, and this gave her a new sense of purpose. In the days that followed, invitations and opportunities began to appear. Local concerts, small recitals, and even workshops for young musicians opened up. She felt grateful but cautious. She did not want to rush or lose herself in the rush of attention. She remembered the long hours spent in practice, the quiet mornings and late nights, and she knew that true growth came from dedication and persistence, not just recognition. One afternoon, she received a letter from the famous pianist himself. The words were simple but meaningful. He expressed his admiration for her talent and invited her to attend a private mentorship program with him. She read the letter over and over, her hands trembling with excitement. It was a chance to learn from someone she had once thought impossible to impress. But more than that, it was proof that her music had made a lasting impact, that her efforts had not gone unnoticed. She spent the next weeks preparing for the mentorship program. She practiced with renewed focus, exploring new pieces, experimenting with different techniques, and refining her emotional expression. She wanted to enter the program not just as a performer, but as a musician who could grow, learn, and absorb every lesson. Her family and friends offered support and encouragement, reminding her of how far she had come and how much potential she held. The first day of the mentorship arrived, and the young pianist felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She entered the familiar grand hall where she had first met the famous pianist, now feeling a strange sense of familiarity and confidence. He greeted her warmly, a hint of a smile on his face, and invited her to sit at the piano. The atmosphere was calm but charged with expectation. This was a chance to learn, to grow, and to deepen her understanding of music. During the sessions, the famous pianist guided her through pieces she had never attempted before. He pointed out subtle nuances, encouraged her to explore emotional depths, and challenged her to push beyond her comfort zone. Each lesson was intense, requiring focus, patience, and courage. She listened carefully, absorbing every word, every gesture, every piece of advice. The mentorship was not just about technique. It was about connecting with the music, understanding its story, and expressing it fully. The young pianist faced moments of frustration and doubt, but she also discovered strengths she had not realized she possessed. She learned that mistakes were part of growth, that perseverance mattered more than perfection, and that music was a living, breathing form of expression. She felt herself transforming, not only as a pianist but as a person, gaining confidence, resilience, and a deeper connection to her art. One day, after a particularly challenging lesson, the famous pianist invited her to perform a piece she had been preparing. She approached the piano, her hands steady despite the flutter of nerves. She began to play, pouring every emotion, every thought, and every experience into the music. The notes flowed naturally, carrying her story and her journey. The famous pianist listened intently, nodding in acknowledgement as her performance unfolded. When she finished, he smiled genuinely, praising not just her skill, but the depth of feeling she conveyed. The young pianist realized that this mentorship was more than instruction. It was a partnership, a shared journey of discovery and expression. She learned to trust her instincts, to take risks, and to embrace her unique voice. She felt inspired, knowing that her music could touch hearts, convey emotions, and leave a lasting impression. The guidance she received helped her see the piano not just as an instrument, but as an extension of herself, capable of speaking when words could not. As weeks turned into months, she began to perform in larger venues, her confidence growing with each appearance. Audiences were captivated by her music, drawn not just to her technical skill, but to the emotion and authenticity she brought to every piece. She received invitations to perform in different cities, collaborate with other musicians, and participate in special events. Each opportunity was a chance to learn, to grow, and to share her gift with a wider audience. Through it all, she remained grounded, remembering the early mornings and late nights, the small victories, and the moments of doubt. She knew that her journey was ongoing, that there would always be challenges and new horizons to explore. But she also knew that her passion for music, her dedication, and her willingness to face fears had brought her this far and would carry her even further. One evening, after a long day of practice, she sat at her piano alone in her room. She reflected on the journey from the quiet corners of her home to the bright stages filled with applause. She thought about the famous pianist who had once ignored her, and how, through persistence and passion, she had earned his respect. She felt gratitude for every challenge, every note, every lesson that had shaped her into the musician she had become. She played softly, letting the music flow naturally, each note a reflection of her experiences. The melodies told her story, the struggles, the triumphs, the growth, and the dreams yet to come. She realized that the true reward was not recognition alone, but the ability to express herself fully and to connect with others through her art. The music was her voice, her heart, and her legacy. In the quiet of that night, she made a promise to herself. She would continue to play, to learn, to grow, and to share her music with the world. She would face challenges with courage, embrace opportunities with gratitude, and remain true to the passion that had carried her this far. She knew that her journey as a musician would never truly end, but that was what made it beautiful. Each day, each performance, each note was a step forward, a chance to create, to inspire, and to touch hearts. The young pianist understood that the story of her music was still being written. She had overcome doubt, faced fear, and earned the respect of someone she once thought unreachable. But more importantly, she had discovered her own strength, resilience, and the power of expressing herself through her art. The journey ahead was full of promise, and she embraced it with joy, determination, and an unwavering love for the music that had always been her guide.